Hello and welcome to another edition of Hypnosis Helps with me, Neil Myers, hypnosis practitioner, and my colleague Bill Miller, fellow hypnosis practitioner. And this one is about one of my favourite topics, which is stress, talking about stress. And actually I've already produced stress in this, before we started, in my colleague Bill, because Bill was saying, but we're not prepared for this show. We haven't got what we need.
Let's get back to the real story. You said, I've got it. I'll do all the preparation. And then the day before you start saying, well, have you looked at that yet, Bill? You know, yes, it produced a lot of stress.
So we've got, so you see, just to prove that we really mean what we say and follow what we practice, I had to produce the stress.
That's right. There you go.
But this topic is a favourite topic of mine and something that we enjoy talking about, which might sound strange at first, but the reason is because hypnosis is very often associated with states of relaxation, and very frequently we are told, medically and generally, that stress is a big cause of problems, illness, and all sorts of other negative effects in many, many, many people. Mm-hmm. It's generally said that we lead more stressful lives now than perhaps has ever been led in the history of our civilization. But of course, they've been probably saying that for every generation.
Yeah,
since.
right. You know,
those steam engines are now really stressful compared to what they used to be. But so we're going to talk about stress, what stress is, stress relief techniques, and we're going to describe how hypnosis can be used in the relief of stress. And Bill has done a lot of work on this, and we do regularly present stress relief programs. Just before we launch into the main body of it. Mm-hmm. I just want to say just two things about stress. One of the most common things we hear is that stress causes illness, or it can cause illness. And this has been a tenet that's well accepted by the medical community for decades and decades. There's nothing new about that. The only thing I will say connected with that is that when we're looking at the causes of illness where there's a body and mind connection, even though the manifestation may be in stress, it's very often beyond that. It's more specific. So I talk about the relief of stress as a kind of a shotgun approach, whereas very often what we're looking at is very, very specific causes of why things occur. Now, saying that, all of us, in different ways, and what we're going to talk about, experience varying degrees of stress through our lives. And I think one of the most valuable and important things for all of us, men, women, young and old, to learn is how to manage and relieve that and what it is. And this is what we're going to talk about today, and how hypnosis can help as far as that's concerned. So that being said, Bill.
There we go. All right. So I actually I always go to some authoritative sources, as you know, to get definitions and so forth. And one I love is the Cleveland Clinic.
Yes.
It's a really world famous. It's not a tiny clinic. It's a big hospital and the whole thing. And they have some really great stuff. And so they had some really good stuff on this, the definition of stress. So basically, it's the body's reaction to any change, that requires an adjustment and a response from you. Okay. And the body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional responses. So physical ones, it can put stress chemicals into the system and all that kind of stuff. The one thing that interesting, most couple sources said, when we think about stress, we always think, oh, it's negative stress, but stress can be positive stress.
Absolutely.
And so stress is actually a normal part of life, and you can get stress from your environment, your body, or your own thoughts, as we know.
And in fact, would it be fair to say that, if you've got no stress, you're probably dead?
Well,
there's no life there without, because there's positive stress and negative stress. Right?
That's right. That's funny. When I was watching a video on Jerry Kine, famous hypnotist, that's what he says. If you tell me you don't want negative or positive stress, you're telling me I want to be dead. And so that's really true. And stress can have very positive effects.
Sure.
I myself always felt that I worked better in my former job as under a moderate to small amount of stress.
Right.
It got me up and moving, got me excited about it, and gets you productive.
And excitement or enthusiasm, what we would generally think of as a positive energy, which people don't think of as stress, is a form of positive stress. It causes a boost in energy.
Right.
So again, when we tend to think of stress, when we talk about stress, we always tend to think of the debilitating negative effects upon it. And one of the things that we want to do here in the show is to understand the whole spectrum of it. Because we're not really talking about, people talk about eliminating stress. People come to us and say, can you eliminate stress from my life?
Yeah.
And, you know, if I'm not being too facetious, I say, well, if you want to be dead, I can do that. But, well, I can't.
Right.
But, but what we're talking about is managing it. We're talking about balance and equilibrium in our lives, not complete elimination.
Right.
So again, from a hypnotic standpoint, this is a little bit different. When people come to us about a fear or a phobia, well, we're talking about eliminating that.
Right.
Right. When people come to us about, something that's manifesting as a physical illness, if it has an emotional basis that we can deal with, we're talking about eliminating that. Here we're talking about the equilibrium, the balance, and the management of it.
Right, and you also have to look at too, is it having negative effects? That's the real question. Is it having negative emotional, mental, or physical effects on your body?
Yes.
Because even like everybody says, I'd like to win the lottery. Well, okay, talk to a lottery winner who's just won $50 million.
Yes.
And there's an initial flush of positive stress, excitement, and this and that. But then a lot of times you'll talk to them, they'll say, every relative I had came out of the woodwork and with their hand out and this and that, and it starts creating a lot of negative stress. Now, they don't want to give away the money,
right?
And they don't want the positive stress associated with that,
right?
But if it does for them change over into negative and starts having very bad negative physical, mental effects,
right?
They do want help with that.
Reminded me of the old joke, that money is relative. The more money, the more relatives.
Yeah, exactly. That's really true.
And it's funny that you should say that. And one of my a friend of mine works with a very, very wealthy individual. When I say wealthy, he's worth, I don't know, a couple of $1 billion, fairly substantial sum of money. And with that sort of sum of money, you've generally got to have a team of accountants and lawyers helping to manage your money.
Yep.
And he actually said that when my friend looked at his boss's, who's also his friend's life, he said that about 80% of his life is concerned with managing his money. He's so completely where he's paying taxes, whether this corporation should be paying taxes over here or making a loss there or a profit over there, and all the advice and all the various things. And ironically, his state of wealth, at least in him, he said in his friend, creates enormous levels of stress. So even when we think, oh, well, if I had that much money, all the stresses in my life would disappear, everybody in their own circumstances, whether it's somebody trying to work from paycheck to paycheck or somebody with billions of dollars experiences stress.
Right.
So these techniques are universal, the things that we do.
That's right. I know I once had applied for a job, which was a big promotion, and no one had ever made the leap from the job I had to this new job because they felt the skill sets were so much higher needed. And so I never thought that they would give me this job, but I was encouraged to apply, and I went in and I did a really great job in the interview. When they offered me the job, I came out with I said basically, "You're kidding me," but I didn't quite use kidding. I was stunned that they actually did it. Okay, now I've moved into a job that was a plum job, of course.
Right.
I was exhausted every weekend for the next two years because it was the biggest program in the company. None of the other it was project management. None of the other project managers wanted it because it was some mean team members and the most stressful thing. But I had a lot of negative stress and I had a lot of positive. So I wasn't going to give up the position, but I wanted to manage the stress a little bit better.
And stress, as we talk about it, also in terms of age, and we're going to talk about this, it really does affect young and old. And it's really strange. I remember when I was very lucky. I went to a very good university in the UK, University College London, if anybody's out there. And but University College London had a reputation for working its students very hard.
Right.
And when I went to college, the first month, I was completely overcome with the workload. I mean, I found myself almost in despair. I can't do this. This is just too much for me.
Right.
Now, of course, when you look back on it, you realise it was quite a high workload, but it wasn't that bad.
Right. It wasn't crushing.
But to a young person at that time, it felt all-encompassing.
Right.
Now, when we were talking about looking at young people who tell us, it's very, very difficult at college and school. We're looking at work and children and clients,
right.
and, all the things that adults. It doesn't seem like much for us. And then at a different part of life, other things become stressful. So the capacity to manage and deal with stress is such an important skill that goes all the way through our lives.
Right.
I'm surprised that we're not taught it at college or before that. At school. Right. How do we deal with it?
We should. And so to carry on. I like the way they put this in the Cleveland Clinic site.
Yes.
Stress that continues without relief can lead to a condition called distress.
Yes.
Right. And it's a negative stress reaction.
Right.
The other thing about that's very important is stress is a protective mechanism.
Yes.
Okay. It was with us, obviously as we evolved, and it evolved to save us. If you were out there and an animal threatened you, you needed to either freeze, fight, or flight.
Right.
Leave. And so it poured all these stress chemicals into your body to raise your heart rate,
right.
and do all these things and get your muscles ready for flight or fight,
right.
And all this. So it was very positive as far as its protective mechanism. But back then, you would have a stressor in an animal, something like that, and then you'd get away from it, and the stress would go down.
Right.
The problem is, modern society, the stress goes up. Right. And a lot of times it stays. It's not the same type of stress situation.
And I think, as I understand it, this is a really important point, because this is something that we say to our clients to help them understand in a simple way why stresses can have such a damaging effect upon them, even physically. Because people will often tell you, I'm very stressed, but I kind of get by and I keep everything else okay. And we say a really simple thing. My understanding is that when an animal, let's take a grazing animal, is out there grazing, their energy is going towards the digestion and other things. And when they experience stress, all that, the energy, including those stress chemicals, are shunted towards the muscles so that they can run or fight, whatever they have to do.
Right.
Now, when they stop doing that, those chemicals and the other responses drain, and they go back to the digestive processes. Now, imagine if we're like those animals and we're in a state of constant stress because of anxiety, worry, because unlike an impala on the savannah, we can imagine a situation. We can conceive of what something would be like in the future if we don't attend to something in the present. And that produces that same stress response. And literally, it shuts down our conditions of comfortable homeostasis because we're in a constantly stressed condition.
Right.
And then people wonder why they have digestive problems, why they have other problems with their health because of stress. And so these things are real, folks. These are not just imaginations. These are actual effects.
No, that's right. And
they're built as a protective mechanism.
Exactly. And like you said, when we talk about it, the specific in that case is it actually reduces blood flow to your stomach and moves it out to your muscles so you can run or fight or whatever. Well, if you've got a lot of food in your stomach, you need the blood there so you can get a lump in the pit of your gut, you say, and things like this. Well, you've stopped digesting. Mm-hmm. So the fact is, it's doing a bad thing in that case. Right. And if we're always heightened in this, then it's a problem.
Right. And so it's the ongoing nature of that definition that causes distress.
Right. It's the ongoing that causes the modern distress. That
modern stress. Right.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you've said this, and it was really good that they said on this website is it disturbs the body's internal balance or equilibrium. And that's really important because then they're very clear. They say that leads to physical symptoms like headaches, upset stomach, elevated blood pressure, chest pain, sexual dysfunction, and sleeping problems, amongst a lot of other things. Right. And then you can get emotional problems that also stem from this. And those, they talk about depression, panic attacks, or other forms of anxiety.
So one of the things that we talk about, and we've talked about a little bit on the show, is that a problem maybe as a result of stress arises. Then one becomes, or an individual can become anxious about that because they see an ongoing problem. And then they become anxious about the fact that they can't deal with the problem. And so they worry about that.
Right.
And because they've had ongoing worry and anxiety and distress, they then become depressed about it. Right. So very often when people come to us and they talk about depression, one of the things that we say is that depression is usually at least third along. They've got the stress, the anxiety, the worry, and then the depression, maybe fourth along even.
Right.
So it's all linked. So this really goes to the heart of a lot of matters.
Right.
Now, there's something, and again, I'm
Good.
jumping around here, but I think Bill will have patience with me. One of the things that is very tempting to believe is that relaxation in and of itself is a panacea to all the stresses that occur. Now, I want to be really clear on this, and I think we want to emphasize this. We've heard many times that hypnosis in itself is not relaxation. Some people have tried to judge the hypnotic state by judging degrees of relaxation. We will also say that hypnosis can produce deep states of relaxation. The deepest states of relaxation I've ever personally experienced or observed have been as a result of deep hypnosis. It's not the same thing, but it can produce that. But here's the other thing, and the key thing, is whilst relaxation is very helpful and we all need relaxation in our lives, relaxation in and of itself is not necessarily the universal panacea. I wish it was. The idea being if we can all just get relaxed enough, all the problems go away. No, some problems certainly do, and some problems are managed and alleviated, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
So just understand that in the whole context. When somebody talks to you, if you approach somebody about hypnosis and all they're really talking about is various forms of relaxation, that is a part of what we do. It is certainly by no means all of what we do. So just bear that in mind when you look at it.
Right, and the fact is that it also depends upon what the source of the stress is.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, mild stress that's situational and
Right.
things like that, relaxation might be all you need
Right.
for it. Other things, as we've talked about in the past, stem from deep trauma earlier on in life,
Yes.
and you can't relax that away.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. The other thing I want to say about this is, like we say, well, you can cause emotional problems, anxiety, this and that. And you said this very clearly about, then you're anxious about, being anxious or whatever.
Yes.
The problem is that's a feedback loop. And so it's a closed cycle that keeps self-reinforcing.
Very well put.
So it'll only get really worse.
Right.
If you don't do some form of intervention.
Absolutely, 100%.
Right. So the other thing then to talk about is, what are the causes, right? And it can be emotions, physical things, situational things. One thing that Jerry talked about a lot is hate, guilt, anger, jealousy, bitterness, all these feelings like that. You're with a spouse or a significant other, and you love them, so dearly, and you're worried they're going to have an affair. And so anytime a man would talk to your wife or whatever, you get jealous, and that really pours a lot of bad chemicals into your system.
Right.
Then it can affect your relationship,
Right.
which can then create more stress.
Right.
So and I think Jerry mentions that the hate and the guilt really just
They're poisons to the
they're
system.
poisons.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really poisons.
So let's talk, but just let me go back one step, because I want to
Sure.
point something out that we talk about there are environmental effects to stress, and some of those we can change. And there are I mean, let's take a simple one, which I hope few of us have experienced, but perhaps everybody's experienced, which we find a bill and we can't pay the bill. A check arrives or an unexpected expense. Something goes wrong with the car and you can't meet the bill, or you don't know how you're going to, and you immediately there's a response to how am I going to deal with this? What do I have to do? What do I have to change? And that's that immediate response that comes up. Now, of course, if Great Aunt Nellie then gives you the check to cover the expense, the stress disappears until the next time. But the thing about all types of stress is that it's debilitating, because when that stress is in our minds, when it's playing in our bodies, it actually shuts down our capacity to be able to figure out, well, if I just pay that the next month, or if I just do an extra shift here, if I take an extra, whatever it is we need to do, except for asking Great Aunt Nellie for the money, then we figure out a way to do it. So it literally, the stresses inhibit our responses. It's almost as if they shut everything down until our world becomes one of just, all we see is stress. I have a client right now, and they have some difficult conditions physically to deal with, no doubt about it. But they see the whole of their world in terms of these conditions, an ongoing stressful environment in which there is no relief. So one of the things that we're talking about here, we've very often talked about the deep causes of stress, like for example, when post-traumatic stress disorder, but we're talking here about the relief of those ongoing stresses that just life presents itself.
Right, exactly, yeah. Yeah, so, you've got a lot of things. We're talking about physical obesity, lack of exercise, and things like that. So now, if you move into, well, what can you do about these kind of things, right? You can change your situation. Okay, maybe you can, maybe you can't. You hate your job, maybe you could get a different one. You're in a bad marriage. Okay, you can reduce the stress by going through a divorce. Oh, that'll increase it for a while.
Yes,
eventually,
that's true.
some of us know this.
Yes, we do.
It'll decrease the stress.
Yes.
Right. But in the interim, it's going to increase it.
Yes.
Right, and stuff. And exercise is a big help in this.
Oh,
I know
absolutely.
myself. If I feel really stressed, even I use the hypnotic skills I have. But I also go exercise.
Sure.
First of all, it's healthy for me.
Yes.
And I always feel better afterwards.
So this is a very good example. I want to talk about exercise because it has both the positive and negative aspects of stress, and it's quite odd if you think about it. We don't exercise, and ironically, that makes us stressed. Yet, to exercise, we literally need to produce some level of stress in our body.
Physical stress.
Right, which in itself produces chemical, emotional, physical, mental responses that reduce stress.
Right.
And this is a perfect example. If we get to a point where we over-exercise, let's say, in particular ways to the point of exhaustion, well, our whole system becomes stressed.
Right.
On the other hand, if we finish up sitting on the couch eating potato chips and, drinking, gallons of soda, then we can become stressed in a different way.
Right.
So again, it's not a question of whether we should or whether we shouldn't or whether stress is there or not. There's going to be stress. It's how we deal with it.
Right.
It's how we manage it. It's how we incorporate it. And as Bill quite rightly said, exercise, a very healthy and positive form of stress pursued in a reasonable way, depending upon our physical condition, our age and our experience, is extremely beneficial. Without movement, without that stress, we die.
Right.
We just stop existing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing, I want to kind of just cycle back for 1 second.
Sure.
Because something you were saying about you're paying the bills and
Right.
the stress and this and that. And the thing is, the thing about it is, you don't necessarily want to eliminate that stress. If that stress is enough to make you go, I'm going to take another shift, and you do make a change, say a permanent change, that helps you, then it's a positive. And if it's just mildly motivating you, I wouldn't eliminate it. But if it gets to the point where now you're having the negative effects,
Right.
the anxiety and this and that, then you want to reduce it at least and maybe eliminate it. The other problem is that it can then start causing other behaviors. Some people drink.
Excessive stress, you mean?
Yeah, excessive stress.
Negative stress. Yeah.
Negative stress can some people try to self-medicate.
Right.
And so they'll drink. Well, now that's a physical source of stress because you're stressing your body with that alcohol and trying to eliminate it, and it's a feedback loop. And so it can again go on and on. You have to decide if it's negative.
Yeah. So these are what I would classify as the unhelpful, usually pretty false ways of so-called reducing stress. They would include excessive alcohol consumption. They would include, a classic one, of course, is cigarette smoking. I mean, every person that comes to me for smoking cessation, almost without exception, at some point says, well, I smoke because it relieves stress. Now, we know chemically, of course, it does not do that. It does the exact opposite.
It does the opposite.
And, of course, apart from the fact that, they're damaging their health and they're being subject to a habit that they don't want, then the fixed idea is that if I do this, if I put a cigarette to my mouth and take a puff, it relieves stress. So what they've created in themselves, ironically, is a form of hypnotic anchor. They've bypassed their critical faculty because their critical faculty is saying, this is unhealthy, this is no good for you, it doesn't even feel good. But they've bypassed that and said, if I can just do this every so often when I feel very stressed, I'll feel a lot better. And as long as people have that association between stress relief and cigarette smoking, it's going to be very hard for them to stop because it's like me saying to them, I don't want you to relieve yourself from stress anymore. Right? And so we ensure that one of the things we do is give people a replacement, not just in terms of the understanding that it doesn't really relieve stress, but there are other more beneficial ways of doing so. So
Right.
so one of the things that we help do in hypnotic programs is to enable people to be aware enough that they swap unhealthy stress relief for healthy. And another example of that is excessive eating.
I was going to do that.
Right?
To cover that.
It's you know, it's like, oh, I eat to reward myself. So when I'm feeling bad, I'll go and eat 6 donuts or whatever it might be. Right? Everybody's done that in some shape or form, I think.
But think about that. In the modern society, we have unrelenting stress.
Right.
And if you use eating, well, then you're going to constantly eat, and then your weight's going to go up. That creates both physical stress. You probably won't like it. Emotional stress. It can put strain on relationships, and now you've got relationship stress going on there, and so forth. The particularly bad thing, you know, from my perspective, you know, you think about, well, if you're going to smoke or eat too much, isn't eating too much the better choice here? And it's not. The problem is, to a degree, it might be, but the problem is, when we're trying to help somebody, they don't need to smoke.
Right.
So we can, you know, give them the suggestions to change that, stop that, eliminate it.
Right.
It's easy. They have to eat.
Right.
And so it's much harder working with somebody who's overeating than it is somebody who's smoking and has truly decided they're ready to quit.
That's right. And so again, we say in these, and it's similar to eating and stress, we say this: you need to have some stress in your life. It's positive aspects like the stress of exercise, as an example.
Right.
But you need to understand how to manage it as well, because if you don't, you're gonna run into that destructive cycle, and it's going to have an effect on everything: your health, your body, your relationships, your family, your children if you have children. Everybody's going to be affected by that cycle.
Right.
You know, one of the stresses, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, you stop me, but
Go ahead.
one of the stresses that struck me about modern life, which perhaps I don't know if any generation's experienced this before, is the stress of what I call the forms of modern communication. You know, even I can remember, and some of you I'm sure can, times before cell phones. There was a period of time when nobody could reach us. We could be in places where we couldn't be reached, purposefully. Now, everybody, it seems, is reachable all the time. Somebody's always texting us or emailing us or calling us or instant messaging us, and there's a general expectation that we have to be available to the world constantly.
Perfect example of that is last night. You and I were talking about getting ready for this show, right? And you said, I'll call you back in an hour, right? I think it was like 2-3 hours later, and you apologized profusely, but you got one client after another, and that's important.
Right.
So you take those calls and everything. And so, yeah, we're reachable. I'll tell you one thing, if you want to talk about non-hypnotic ways. Myself, I really drew the line when I was in basically big organization and so forth, all that. And, you know, because I would have bosses that would say, you know, keep your cell phone on, going on vacation, how do I reach you? Right. And you know what I say? You can't.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the fact is that I shut my phone off, or at least put it on Do Not Disturb. I would not answer phone calls. And some other people would say, how can you do that? I don't know. I decided to do it, and I just tell them this is what's happening.
Right.
Because otherwise, I knew myself,
Right.
and I knew that even if it was minor questions, if I'm being contacted, it's going to raise my stress because that job was so stressful.
Right.
Now, if it's a client now, it wouldn't bother me.
Right.
It's a different thing. But in that job, yeah, it would raise stress. And when I took a vacation, I needed a clean break of at least a week so that I could just let go of everything I was thinking about the place and really lower my stress.
This gets to the point, folks, where what we're doing, which we're about to talk about, and our hypnotic techniques and the tools that we use meet the things. Because, for example, there are many things that we can do that have nothing to do with hypnosis to eliminate stress. As Bill said, you know, turn off your phone, take a vacation, go out fishing, you know, whatever it is that you do for you. But here's where the meeting point is. You're on vacation, you turn that phone off, and there's a little thought in the back of your mind going, but what if they need me and they call me and I'm not there, and then I get back and they go, well, you know, you're fired, or you know, we needed you at a crucial moment, you weren't there, and you said, well, I was on vacation. They go, yeah, but you know.
We don't
and there's
care.
that little thought that winds that. That, at that point, is what's producing the stress.
Right.
Because now you've got the stress, oh, should I turn the phone on or shouldn't I? You know, if I don't, it's coming up. And